Good afternoon. Is this on? Now it's on. Good afternoon to everyone. Buenas tardes. I know that we're probably the last thing between the lunch in a bit, but and getting some free time. So we'll try and be snappy and quick. A very good friend of mine, a current senator from a southern state in the U.S., once told me that speaking in public or conducting a panel like this was akin to a Texas Longhorn. 1 point here, 1 point here, and a lot of bull in the middle. So I'm going to try and avoid that pitfall by trying to conduct a snappy conversation with our panelists today. This is a fascinating panel. If you look at how the international, how the world has changed and how international relations have changed, we're in certain ways going back to what was prevalent in the late Middle Ages and early Renaissance, where the cities, the city-states, played an incredibly important role in human connections. Back then it was Florence and Venice and Genoa and Hamburg. Today it's London, Shanghai, LA, New York, you name them. And so the discussion that I hope we can trigger today is how in the midst of the pandemic, heading into the recovery mitigation, the federal governments engage and create synergies with mayors, with governors, in not only learning the lessons of what didn't work, what needs to change, but also how to prevent what we all know is around the corner. You all have heard about black swans. The pandemic was not a black swan. It's what we call a gray rhino. The difference between gray rhinos and black swans is a black swan comes out of nowhere. A gray rhino is something that we know is there, we see the signs, and we choose to ignore them, like climate change. And we know that at some point we will see new challenges related to new pandemics. So what we hope to achieve in this panel is not only what have governors and mayors been doing in their engagement with federal national governments, but some of the lessons going forward. To join me in this discussion, I'd like to invite the governor of Yucatan, the Honorable Mauricio Vila, to join us, the Honorable Claudia Cornejo, Minister of Tourism, Foreign Trade and Tourism of Peru, who will join us virtually via the screen. I can't see her yet. The Honorable Edmund Bartlett, Minister of Tourism of Jamaica. Jacqueline Mora, Vice Minister of Tourism of the Dominican Republic. And last but not least, Roger Dow, President, CEO of the U.S. Travel Association, who's also joining us virtually. Let me start with you, Governor. If you look at what's been happening around the world, I'm convinced that one of the fundamental cleavages that the pandemic has exposed isn't between governments on the left or governments on the right, or authoritarian regimes and liberal democracies. It's between efficient and non-efficient governments, nations. And when you look at those countries that have done things adequately, you tend to see good, constructive, synergistic engagement between mayors, governors, and federal national authorities. In certain nations, we've seen sort of if it's the US, a 50 states, 50 solutions approach. In Mexico, it'd be a 32-32 solutions and approach paradigm. And while it's clear that there isn't one size fits all and that there isn't one recipe that can be applied and replicated elsewhere, what state-level strategies do you think have been most successful from where you stand? Why, and as a governor who has done, I think, a very important and successful job in Yucatan, how have you balanced federal policy with the state's needs, not only in terms of mitigation and control of the pandemic, boosting tourism, but of setting the stage and the stepping stones for the recovery going forward?
Gracias, Arturo. Mira,
Thank you, Arturo. Actually, the issue of a pandemic is something that has tested us all and has tested our limits. And unquestionably, something on which we have worked hard from Yucatan is to see the issue of health outside of any political theme. Because what we have lived in the pandemic requires of the commitment of everybody, the steps we have had to make as a government to start restricting people, saying you cannot do this, you cannot go out to work, you must have a restriction in hours, have not been easy. From the point of view of the Yucatan government, what we have done is to have a very close relationship. We have 106 municipalities, 106 mayors with whom we have to work. And we have done a very focalized strategy of what's the evolution of pandemic in each one of these municipalities, working with each in a coordinated manner with the federal government, but always telling them nobody knows our state better, nobody knows better our challenges, and nobody knows better the evolution of pandemic than those of us living here. So there has been a very sound relationship with the federal government and a very great coordination with municipalities. So first, to take care of the health of citizens, to do the reconversion of beds, to be able to assist all the people who need a hospital bed, to have medical staff available to be able to work, and obviously to allow economic reactivation. In Yucatan, unfortunately, we lost 25,000 jobs between March to August. Today we have recovered these 10,000 jobs, and of course we see in tourism reactivation as the second stage we have to recover the jobs that so much are needed by the families in Yucatan. And for this we need good coordination among the three levels of government, bearing in mind that health is the first thing, but number two is economic reactivation. And economic reactivation can only occur if the private sector and the public sectors work hand in hand. In Yucatan we have always said that jobs are generated by businessmen. We as a government have to facilitate them so they can develop their business. And in this regard, the dialogue we have always had with the private sector is how can we help you meet the protocols? If you don't have the protocols, how can we help you to give you people that will create them? Or if your industry, if you already have protocols that have been internationally approved and have worked, bring them down so we can check them and see together to see how to give you the opportunity of going out to work and activating economy.
Which is, it's the federal government that really has, calls the shots on, whether you open up to international tourism and what protocols are in place. But how do you engage in messaging and a narrative of Yucatan and Yucatan's tourism potential going into the world when it may run counter to some of the policies of the government? I still remember I was a diplomatic tadpole in Washington when we were negotiating NAFTA in the early 90s, and Yucatan had a spectacular campaign. Some of you may remember it, Yes You Can in Yucatan, trying to send a message that beyond what the federal government was doing, Yucatan was forging its own paradigm for investment and tourism. So how do you balance your local needs while maintaining a certain degree of synergy and collaboration with the federal government?
What we have done is creating our own health protocols aligned with the provisions defined by the federal government. For example, in Yucatan, we have good health practices that were supported by the WTTC, and we have also harmonized with the state of Quintana Roo. We must mention that the Yucatan Peninsula is made by three states: the state of Quintana Roo, where we are right now, Cancun, Maya, Riviera; Yucatan, where we have Mérida, Chichen Itza, and the large archaeological sites, and the state of Campeche. To us, it was really important to work regionally, specifically with Quintana Roo, because since this is the largest airport with higher connectivity, the one in Cancun, many of the tourists that arrive to Yucatan arrive first to Quintana Roo. So this harmonization, which was also endorsed by WTTC, has sent a message that regardless of how other states in the Republic are in Mexico, here in Yucatan and Quintana Roo, we have good health practices, protocols that are worked, endorsed by international organizations. Ahora cambio la palabra.
Representatives of national governments how they are engaging with local officials and governors and provincial leaders, depending on the organization of the countries, and sort of how do you work with mayors, governors, provincial leaders in developing these holistic approaches? Minister Bartlett, let me start with you.
Well, firstly, I represent a small island state with less of the configuration of my bigger partners. And so perhaps the management is a little easier in that communication is much easier with fewer states or parishes, as we call them, to contend with. Firstly, we have to look at what are the legal arrangements within which you can operate. And when a pandemic approaches or is evident, we begin by invoking certain emergency regulations. And so we have the emergency regulations that we brought into being to enable the compliance to be had from all member states, indeed all parishes and all municipalities. So we began with that. And then we developed, of course, a whole series of very robust protocols. The Ministry of Health became the leader, and for the first time, health was in charge. And health literally directed the traffic in terms of what were the accepted norms, how do we structure arrangements. And then, of course, we had the private sector. So health in terms of the public sector driver, and the private sector in terms of the economy, because for us it was a matter of now balancing well-being, livelihood and lives. And so that became the sort of format of management. What are the protocols? Protocols as accepted by the WHO, and indeed the Ministry of Tourism that I represent played a critical role in literally front-loading the discussions on protocols. And we benefited from the WTTC in terms of their own standards that were set. And Jamaica became the third country in the world to have the safe travel seal from the WTTC because of the protocols that we had. We brought in help from one international agency, and the Pricewaterhouse Group, for example, worked with us in working through those protocols, pulling best practices from elsewhere, and also drawing on what had happened in previous pandemics, although this one was different. So essentially what you had was a coalescing of partnerships, resources, and eventually the culmination of a common set of protocols. Everybody understood. And the second thing was to communicate that protocol across to everyone. Training of all the key players and workers, the frontline workers, your health workers, the tourism workers in particular. We spent some time in training. We utilized technology in the process through virtual platforms. We were able to train 20,000 workers in the tourism sector with 7 to 8 critical touch points of managing COVID. And then we established geographical areas that we regarded as what has become well accepted in the world today as the resilient corridor. And the resilient corridor for us was that specialized area that was designed within the touristic areas in particular, but was characterized by full COVID compliance. Every touch point for tourism, COVID management, social distancing, mask wearing, sanitation, full sanitation, utilizing technology to ensure that there was touchless arrangements as well. So, and then critical to all of it was testing. So a full testing regime that requires negative tests from whatever the requirements were. You know, in our case, PCR was the standard. And so we really stayed with PCR for a long time until antigen tests and so on became more popular, and we embraced them as well. And critical to all of it was then certification. So every entity that operated in the public space in Jamaica had to be certified to be COVID compliant. And we also had teams that would ensure compliance. So we developed a whole regime of compliant participants. And they included the security forces, the health, public health workers, the full epidemiological group that were responsible for public health. And then the tourism sector came in through our tourism development company that had a series of players who are out there enabling and securing full compliance. And finally, the local authorities, the parish councils as we call them, district constables and everyone. And the last but by no means the least, the ordinary Jamaican. Because in the final analysis, to enable full compliance and to make sure that the plans and the programs and indeed the legal and regulatory framework that was established to enable compliance, we had to have legitimacy. And legitimacy comes from the people accepting, responding, and complying.
You've mentioned two key aspects here, which are communication and someone who plays the role of an air traffic controller vertically and horizontally, which are very, very important in the engagement between federal and state and local authorities. Minister Cornejo, would you like to jump in on this issue?
Thank you and good afternoon. Yes, I think it's very relevant what the minister just mentioned, because basically in the case of Peru, where I have been working in the public and in the private sector for the last 20 years, we really started developing national strategic plans for the industry about 15 years ago. And since the very beginning, the way that we thought about developing the industry had to do with a very close relationship between not only the different levels within the public sector, but also the relationship with the private sector. And so in the case of the pandemic, what happened last year that we really had to go back and sit down and work together with the local authorities, with the different regions of Peru, and of course the private sector, in order to come together with the protocols and work with the health authority from our country in order to, look for a way forward to continue to develop our industry. So I'm happy to say that right now we really have come down with different regional plans in order to restart tourism and its recovery, and that at every step we have been working together with the private sector. And that is very relevant and that is very important. And it's part of the vision that we have, that if we want to really continue the growth and the sustainable growth of our industry, we have to do this together, and every actor has to play its part.
Thank you, Vice Minister Mora.
Yes. I think in our case, I will speak in Spanish just to do it just faster. En nuestro caso, yo creo que
I was speaking Spanish just to do it faster. In our case, three basic elements came together. One, leadership. Two, participation. And three, vision. What is what we did? In the Dominican Republic, in the middle of the pandemic, we changed the government, the party. There was a full change in federal and local governments. So the Minister of Tourism came and arrived with a vision. And this very detailed vision, which brought it to a form led by the President of the Republic that is called Tourism Cabinet. So a special tourism cabinet was created, led by the President of the Republic, led by the Minister of Tourism, but with the participation of the local governments, private sector, and all the public entities, including the Treasury, tax, customs, including the private entities from the biggest to the smallest representatives of tour operators and tourism guides. They got together every 15 days, they learned the plan, they validated, and they started a very well-coordinated plan, which started from, it's like holding a mast and part of the health security, which started with new protocols that have the certification from WTTC, but most especially a protocol that is divided by sectors, validated and supported with a stamp of Euro Veritas, where most of our investments come. Then we had a technology platform which made accessible to everybody. People were able to download the protocols, and there was a national seal of implementation of protocols. And with this, public health and the Ministry of Tourism went out in a constant inspection of all the institutions to give this seal. And why is this seal is important? The seal says this institution has complied at least 95% of the application of the new protocols. Together with this, simultaneously, work tables were developed per sectors levels, with tour operators, travel agencies, with hotels, with travel agencies, with each one of the sector members, trying to validate, not short term, which are the initiatives that can better work hand in hand with each one of them. The term of participation of collaboration has been critical in this setting, and it has been critical leadership that has come from the top. And together with this, and I believe that this is something that was really important, together with implementation of health protocols, we started validating with our partners outside the Dominican Republic what things were working in other countries, and then we started implementing in the Dominican Republic together with an intelligence platform that enabled us to measure every day the impact we were having in health, in tourism, in hotel occupancy, in jobs, every week, to be able to see if it was having good results or not. And this provided great flexibility to change strategies. And in this same forum, the tourism cabinet that was organized in the different destinations with the different mayors and also sometimes centralized, we were able to see the results of our strategy and change the results at the same time. The cabinet was crucial and basic because all the public and private entities became aligned, so all of us were able to push in the same direction. All the actions resulting from there lasted 3-4 days in implementing them. Everybody made the greatest effort. And there was also a work with our international partners. The issue of airspace, we work with this, we work with the ports, airports, with all the authorities. And we have heard this often, and I will not be tired to repeating that public-private partnership has been essential, but especially cohesion in the government. A private sector will never respect a government that is divided, and I believe the great success of the Dominican Republic has been having this government, a private sector that sees that it's a coherent government, but mostly and very importantly, and I believe we will speak about this later on, participation from the people. When you create hope, it is very positive, but the private sector must believe that this change is permanent. And let me tell you a very brief story that something that happened to me after having actions and having a huge growth of tourism since December and doing everything what was positive. We had to make a harsh decision which affected a specific group, tour operators, and they called us, hey, we're going to go to the press. A relationship that was moving perfectly well, but they reacted immediately. And the following day, I called them. Hey, I forgot to tell you yesterday that we started vaccinating all the tourism sector, and they were very happy. And I asked, why don't you go to the press now? So the private sector must also believe that this change is taking place. It takes time, but I believe it has been the key for success.
Sector in this very ambitious and holistic approach followed by the Dominican Republic. And this obviously leads me to ask Roger, how has the private sector been working with local and state officials in the US, for example, to enhance destination readiness for the next new normal? And what more can be done, and how can the private sector better support state and local efforts for sustainable and inclusive growth? Roger?
Well, as largest travel economy, the U.S. does not even have a government travel office, and which seems like a challenge, but I think it's actually a positive. It forces the private sector to come together and work very closely on all these issues. As soon as the pandemic came, quickly all the airlines, cruise lines, hotels, lodging, destinations, theme parks all got together and built their own protocols, and then put them out to the government, where the government began accepting them. Hey, yes, that's the protocol. right now in moving forward and where we're going to go, I'm very comfortable with a patchwork of solutions because I think that's where you get, the best practices and you can move faster. So I think the benefit we have is we can move much more faster, and this has caused us to have to operate as an entity. And this one silver lining of the pandemic is it showed the U.S. economy, the states and local, how critical travel is and how we must work together. And I think the hospitality, health and safety is going to be the new hospitality going forward. And we can no longer rest on our laurels. And this has taught us a lesson, and we've got to be prepared for the next one because it will be coming.
Let me go backwards. Let me start with you, Roger. When you look forward, what does sustainable and inclusive growth look for each one of you? And I'll start with Roger. Sort of how to engage in this, particularly again with local and state stakeholders.
It's become much more of a priority from a destination standpoint. You recognize NYC and company for the great job they're doing in sustainability. But I look at different states, whether it be Florida, Virginia, Hawaii, doing a great job of involving their citizens. And we're finding much more of, we've got to involve the locals in what we do. We can't just be the travel industry pontificating on what's important, but involving the locals and doing across the board. And it's gaining more and more steam, and it will, in the future continue to do so.
Minister Cornejo.
Bueno, yo creo que en realidad la inclusividad está.
I believe that inclusiveness lies in the heart of the industry, and this has to do with the way in which we look at the development in the future. In the specific case of Peru, I believe that we are convinced that the only way in which we can move forward successfully with the development of the industry, it has to do with sustainability and inclusiveness. And this is not only to include local population, but that they are actually immersed in the industry so they can benefit from what it offers. And actually, this has been the strategy that we have implemented in the last several years, and the thing is that we need to go deeper in it. Tourism has to do with showing ourselves, being authentic, and I believe this is the idiosyncrasy we have as a country, and this is what we are trying to include in all the work strategies. And I also believe that it is better being accepted by more social groups in the country, and it's part of the work strategies with the private sector. So inclusiveness and sustainability are the two big pillars for us in the industry for the following years. Viceministra.
Esta estrategia con 5 pilares, ¿verdad? 5 pilares que están interconectados y que son todos muy importantes. El primero, obviamente, para poder tratar el tema de sostenibilidad e inclusión, que van de la mano. Si tú no generas la inclusión, no es sostenible a largo plazo. Iniciamos con una campaña muy fuerte que se llamaba Más de lo que crees. Tenemos que enseñarle a la gente exactamente qué es el turismo. No son turistas que vienen a lavarse a las playas, son agricultores que están haciendo el tomate que el turista finalmente exporta. Pero aquí hay 5 elementos. El primer elemento es el empleo, donde tú tienes que generar la capacitación necesaria, acorde con las necesidades del mercado, para que este empleado pueda tener un nivel de productividad adecuado y un nivel de remuneración. El segundo eslabón es entrepreneur, es emprendimiento. Tú tienes, el turismo es microempresa. Está lleno de microempresas, todas las playas, todos los lugares. ¿Cómo tú haces sostenible un desarrollo con una microempresa que no está alineada? Y entonces ahí viene el eslabón microempresa y sostenibilidad. Tú tienes que escuchar a esas microempresas, generar soluciones que sean consistentes con sus realidades, hacerlas partícipes, hacerlas centinelas del proceso. Y obviamente esto se da con incentivos, con comunicación y alineando todo lo que es el entorno social a las necesidades de esta microempresa. El tercer elemento que viene la sostenibilidad hay un tema regulatorio, pero este tema regulatorio no puede ir tan rápido que no se pueda adaptar la realidad del sector turismo a este tema regulatorio, y por ende esa regulación se va adaptando y se va consensuando con esas microempresas, las empresas mayores. Y los 2 últimos elementos, que son los más importantes de la cadena, viene a ser, por un lado, el tema de la educación y la familia. ¿Y qué pasa ahí con el tema de educación y familia? Hoy en día sabemos, y por ejemplo en República Dominicana, el sector turismo fue privado y por ende se generó de una manera desorganizada y las empresas hacían temas individuales. Lo primero que tenemos que tratar es de hacer que la familia esté junta. Hoy en día el trabajador se aleja de la familia y rompe ese núcleo familiar. ¿Cómo lo logramos hacer? ¿Cómo hacemos infraestructura de vivienda, de educación en las zonas turísticas para que esta familia permanezca unida? Y dentro de ese sistema educativo donde tenemos que entrar a la mujer, donde tenemos que entrar a las estancias familiares, entrar el tema de...
We have to go into sustainability and making the kids and the children to have a special education program to support sustainability. And these 5 elements must be worked with the family as a main nucleus.
To look at this in 3 ways, beginning with the people. I think sustainability has to be first the capacity building among people to understand, to appreciate, and to respond. And so the training and development of our people, the building of the human capital is critical to being able, first of all, to understand, translate, and to convert. We have to convert ideas and knowledge into practical and meaningful applications that then have economic value. So the next step is to build the economy and to create economic opportunities for sustainable development. And because the tourism family is driven so much by small and medium enterprises, indeed 80% of tourism's experiences are provided by small and medium enterprises. And the harsh truth is that only 20% of the returns from tourism go to that 80% providers. So we have to build capacity. We have to change that paradigm and to deal with that asymmetry that has dogged us over time. So in this new arrangement, as we reset tourism, we have to begin to look at the small and medium enterprises. Another important factor that comes into the equation is the fact that the unemployment fallout, or if you call it the employment fallout from tourism, has been very harsh on the SMEs, or what I call in Jamaica the SMTEs, that's the small and medium tourism enterprises. They have been the real pained group from this pandemic fallout. The second, of course, is the women. We know that 54% of the women. And then, of course, the youth. So to respond to the needs of the SMTEs by way of providing training, secondly, by way of providing funding, capital through special windows with interest rates and so on that are affordable, are critical, and then to provide the arena for marketing and for showcasing and highlighting their small products. And thirdly, I think the environment, which should really be the first in some instances, but we have to make sure that we are very responsive to the needs to ensure that there is environmental management, that we understand the importance of what I call destination assurance, because critical to being able to make people feel comfortable and confident that traveling to a destination is not going to result in pain and suffering and hardship for them is a knowledge that there is a quality water, that when I turn the tap and I drink the water, I say, yes, I'm good, no diarrheal problems. That when I walk in the areas that where I breathe, the air is clean and there's no smog and so on. So those are critical elements of safety that are vital for destination assurance. So I believe that sustainability will mean nothing unless it embraces those 3 critical areas of the people, the economy, and the environment.
Time is tyrannical even in a democracy, and I still want to ask the governor for his take on this, but let's see if we can have one last quick question from all of you responded at the end. But Governor?
Mira, en Yucatán, en nuestro...
Look, in our Yucatan State Development Plan, which was made based on the SDGs of the 2030 UN agenda, we have a pillar topics. The first thing is the decentralization of our tourism offering. You will hear that the city of Mérida concentrates lots of the areas, but we have magic towns, Valladolid, Izamal, Manio, Sisal, or you have heard about Chichen Itza, but we have 22 other archaeological sites open to the public. We have more than 3,000 cenotes or water holes. We have lots of haciendas And the power of centralizing this tourism offering will allow us to generate jobs in other parts of the state. Another point, inclusive tourism, that we have heard constantly about this topic. And the third one, really important to us, which is preserving our culture, our tradition, and our natural inheritance. We have large natural reserves, and it is very important to development to generate economic development, always from a sustainable point of view that will preserve our culture, tradition, and traditions.
Of us, and while the microphones are not going to disappear like the Oscars, our seats may eject us into the roof. So please join me in thanking our panelists, both here and remotely, for this great panel.